Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's web seminar. This is how to use information governance to harmonize clinical information. Just from the interest in this topic, it's clear that this is an important one for providers, as healthcare organizations over the past few years have become pretty much data-rich and simultaneously information poor. Because most organizations have implemented different types of information systems at different times, that information doesn't always match up well enough to make important decisions and actually use it to bring benefit to care delivery. We absolutely have an all-star panel today, and I'm going to just very briefly introduce them. That's me, and now the topic we're going to be will be discussed by Deborah Green. She's Executive Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer at the American Health Information Management Association. Dr. Anna Orlova, the Senior Director for Standards at the American Health Information Management Association. Catherine Lusk, the Chief Health Information Management and Exchange Officer for Children's Health System of Texas. And Neil Ganguly, Vice President and CIO at JFK Health. Full bios are available on the slides you'll be seeing, and they'll be made available to you after the presentation. We do encourage everybody to submit questions through the Q&A box. We're planning to have time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. But without further ado, I want to hand it over to Deborah Green to get us started. And Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fred. I am thrilled to be able to kick off this section of the webinar and thrilled to be a part of the panel with such qualified individuals. AHIMA has been involved in information governance actually since 2013, and we never turn down an opportunity to talk about how important it is in healthcare for us to get to a point of trust in our information. I have the easy part today because I get to really set the stage on what the challenges are that organizations are facing. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the topic of what we have been through since 2004, when the executive order was issued that all healthcare organizations and every person would have an electronic medical record by the year 2014. We didn't quite make that, but many organizations have certainly done a lot of work to try to get there. So we really want to kick off our discussion of challenges faced by organizations by addressing the fact that we have had an enormous rate of adoption of electronic health records, and we have also had a large number of systems and a flood of additional added utilities that go along with electronic health records. We've had expanded sources of data, so new data and new sources for the data, which come from everything in the next line, like new devices, but also new systems and new applications, new utilities. We have done this without really addressing what needed to be addressed ahead of time. So we did not really establish what our rules and standards should be for documenting in the electronic environment. We're going to talk about each of these a little bit more. And then, of course, we have the challenge that we all hear about. There's a daily discussion. And certainly we know based on the number of webinars and efforts in place to address this that we really are not at the level of interoperability that we need to be at in order to effectively use our data and our information. We're strong in some areas of interoperability, but not necessarily in the interoperability of the data and the information itself. So I'd like to go back to the top point there on the rate of adoption of electronic systems. So based on the most recent stats from healthit.gov, we're at about 96%, at least as of the end of 2015. And it's certainly up above that now, but that's within hospitals in terms of their adoption overall of certified electronic health records. And in physicians' offices, we're at 78% adoption. So that has come a long way in a short period of time. In addition, we have to recognize that we have so many more electronic health systems vendors. There are scores of them out there, and many of them are not certified. So we have had not only rapid rate of implementation, but we've had a growth in the systems and the options available. And so there are a lot of challenges just when we look at how you identify what you need, how you select your vendors, et cetera. In addition to that, if I go back down to my point number 4, the lack of agreed upon rules and standards. So what we have done in our race to implement electronic health records is, as I said, we haven't really established what policies and standards we need for documentation practices electronically versus what we dealt with on paper. And so that has really resulted in many problems. It's in fact, the topic of unintended consequences of the EHR is a well-researched topic. A lot of evidence that points to the fact that we have not really defined how we needed to implement and how and also how EHR's usability needed to be improved to help avoid some of the problems that we're seeing. But there are some things that we should have done that are pretty simple and straightforward, but we didn't do. For example, we knew we had problems with documenting on paper. So those have been, they're not just magnified, they're amplified, and you have a lot more of them once there are errors and problems in an electronic record versus a paper one. So we didn't address up front necessarily how you're going to make corrections in the electronic medical record. It's only been recently that there has been as much attention paid to addressing patient identity errors as needed to be. We are making progress there, and in fact, identity management is one of the maturity markers in AHIMA's information governance program. We haven't addressed appropriate use of templates. We haven't addressed automatic feeding of information or data and information into templates. A thing as simple as copy and paste and standards and policies on the use is something that a lot of organizations did not really anticipate in terms of the problems it would cause by not having a policy. What about problem lists and the integrity of problem lists, and which problem list do you go to? So these have been common documentation issues that did result in policies in the paper world, but we did not really anticipate how we needed to really address those policies in an electronic world. Another thing that electronic records have resulted in is because of usability issues, interface issues, the ability for physicians and other clinicians to truly see what they needed to see to understand the state, for them to flip back and forth within the electronic record to gather all their information. We have seen that we still have a situation with shadow records. In other words, documentation created on paper perhaps, saved for later, so it either could be entered or so it could be referenced at the point that it was needed by the clinician. And of course we know that if the legal record really is it has to be addressed, and so anything that is used to document observation, base an assessment on, address care plan and so forth has to be it's part of the legal record and needs to be in the electronic health record. We also are well aware of the common complaints of increased workload and changing workload by physicians. So that's another thing that we probably, had we anticipated some of the issues that we would run into with electronic records, we would have established rules earlier and probably had a more effective implementation process. So we believe that had we governed our processes, we'd be at a higher state of trust in our data and information. Here are just a few examples of what we what we believe that we would be able to affect if we truly had trust in our data and information, we would be using electronic health records more safely. It would be a safer environment for our patients. We'd have more reliable analytics, as an example. We'd be able to prove the value of the care that we're purchasing, which is something that we are all absolutely required to do. So these are just examples of some of the things that we believe that we'd be able to arrive at could we get to a point of trust in our data and information. So have we governed our selection process? If we had actually governed our planning of the implementation of the HRs, and then actually governed how we were implementing the actual implementation process, and then our maintenance processes for systems, and then how we optimize systems. If we govern that, we would be in a better state than we are today. And the other thing that I probably neglected to say is that it's not just EHRs. When we say we're implementing an EHR, how many systems feed those EHRs? And then how many systems do those EHRs feed? So there are multiple systems that have to come together to provide the systems and solutions that we need for day in and day out care in inpatient settings, physicians' offices, long-term care facilities, home health, et cetera. So we didn't really govern our implementations necessarily, but what we seemed to pay more attention to was what we were investing in terms of infrastructure and technologies. And we believe that had we actually focused on the information itself and and kept our eye on the ball of the information and ensuring that it had integrity and trustworthiness, what we needed in terms of data and information, we might be in a different spot than we're in today. But instead, what we have done is we have focused on the technology side, as opposed to, and this here is supposed to be like a water distribution system throughout, a physical plant, as an example. And so this is really we're drawing a parallel between infrastructure and required to deliver water and the water itself. We really need to remember always, when it comes to systems and technology for information, is that what we need here is the information. The technology and the infrastructure exist because we need the information, and that really should be foremost in our efforts. So in terms of governance, because we're here talking about how can information governance help to improve and arrive at a harmonization of clinical data. So where we are today with information governance is, given the mission of healthcare and the consequences to healthcare when we have flawed data or inaccurate data, we really should be further along in our IG adoption. Also, given industry demands and drivers for prioritization. In other words, how long has the triple aim been in place? Improve the safety and care of the individual, improve the health of populations, do that while you're reducing costs. That is a huge demand really for innovation. And how can we innovate unless we have trusted data and information? So we should be further along just based on the drivers of our industry. And also, despite high levels of awareness of adoption, we are really lower than we should be, and we are a little bit lower than other industries. Other industries are grappling with information governance and not necessarily jumping on and making the investments, but actually, for the first time as we compare our data over the last 3 years, in the 16-17 survey that Information Governance Initiative, and they are a cross-industry IG think tank, when we compare our levels of adoption to what they're reporting, we've actually dropped below them by about 3 percentage points. So we're not where we should be given the nature of our business. And so I have some data to share with you that is based on the 2017 AHIMA survey that we completed this summer. And while we have come up over our initial survey, which was done in 2014, in terms of formal adoption of information governance program, which means formally across the organization. We came up by about 2 percentage points. But so the good news here, though, is that we have above 50%, actually 53% in total, of organizations who either have some efforts in place, maybe in pockets, or they have recognized the need and they've got plans in place to implement, or they have a formally implemented organization-wide program. So that's actually about 53%. 32% is the subset of that are the ones that either have a formal program or they've got pockets of activities in specific departments. But so 53% is good news, right? But what does that mean? 47% of the respondents said that they have no recognized need or interest, or they don't know. And this is sad because most of our respondents were director, middle management officer, and ED level, most of our respondents. And we had 1,500 respondents to this first survey. So to me, it was quite disconcerting that we had such a large number, and this is pretty small, but I think that it's reading 24%, and that the number who are interested in taking on information governance is certainly way too small. Now, we believe that the key component in information governance that's going to help to drive harmonization of clinical data rests within data governance. And it was heartening to see that in the survey we did, we asked organizations that if you had the funds and the resources to invest staff and or tools, what would you address in the information governance arena? And 43%, which was really a whopping majority, said that they would go after data governance. Another impressive percent, which is actually the next two are actually technically things that you do within data governance, which is a data dictionary. Believe it or not, a lot of organizations have not really either established or kept up with their data dictionaries, and defining data elements is core because information is made up of data. And if we have problems with our data elements and we don't have them defined, then that's a real problem. But the data records and information inventories, classification, all of those things are really components of data governance that are very, very important in terms of getting to a point of being able to trust the data itself and to ensure that you have harmony in your, across your data. So as I said, IG, information governance, is supported by data governance, and that is one of our key competencies for information governance. And I'm going to step through in a moment, if we have time, what some of these are, but I've already mentioned the data dictionary, data standards, the quality controls, semantics and content standards. And Anna will be talking more about the standards side when I transition to her. So in terms of the challenges faced by organizations, an information governance framework will help to orchestrate and synchronize some very important competencies in information governance, and that includes enterprise information management, data governance, and information technology governance. These are the three legs of the classic three-legged stool. And they are really core competencies for information governance, illustrated by this graphic here. So we have enterprise information management, data governance, and information governance, which have to be synchronized and turning together. This next graphic, what we did here is we identified key maturity markers and key components of the competencies that are enterprise information management, information technology governance, and data governance. And you can see under the data governance gear there, look how many individual components you have. I mean, starting with really organizing and classifying, valuing, defining, having stewardship efforts in place, architecting, addressing taxonomies and nomenclatures and managing those. Master data management and metadata management are so critical. Metadata management in particular, if we do not establish and really manage our metadata, which is the data about the data, then we really can't find it. And I think that later in the presentation, there's going to be a reference to the principles for information governance, Availability is a key principle, and if data aren't available, then we have serious issues because we can't care for our patients. So I mentioned the three of those competencies. So here we have the 10 competencies of the information governance framework. And so those started with the enterprise information management, which I mentioned, data governance, IT governance. It includes analytics. And analytics was one that we added toward the end of defining the framework. Even though that is a use of data, analytics is the perfect indication of how you are doing with information governance. Because if you can't trust your data and its reliability, then you don't have reliable analytics. So that is a measure of the value of your information governance effort. Privacy and security should be no surprise that mastering that is critical for organizations. Legal and regulatory response, a critical component. And some things that you're naturally familiar with, like risk management and compliance, fall into some of these competencies. The next one, which is awareness and adherence, is an example of that. Certainly compliance is a component of that. And then measuring the performance of the IG program itself is a competence. And then we have the IG structure. In other words, how you structure the program, what needs to be defined in terms, and what you see here is oversight of it, executive accountability for it, and then how you have structured the synchronization of critical components. And then strategic alignment, because your governance program should be there to help you achieve your strategies. So the governance program has to stay in alignment with what the strategies of the organization are. And this is a very high-level graphic of the information governance maturity model. And what I wanted to point out is that at a very nascent level, at a starting level, that an organization is going to be much more largely IT-driven and fragmented and siloed in their approach. And that's often what we see. But at a mature level, they are business-driven and, the word didn't show up here, but it should say holistic. So our model, which is a 5-level model, takes into consideration how organizations score themselves across those 10 competencies. There are over 80 maturity markers that fall across those 10 competencies. And those scoring of oneself enables organizations to see how they're doing on an individual competency basis as well as an overall basis. So that is really a high-level review of what that model looks like. So I really wanted to sum this up by saying that, challenges faced by organizations that we went through earlier can be addressed by information governance. And had we had information governance in place as we were implementing solutions, we would be further along in our journey to getting to a point of real trust in our data and information. So what I would like to do now is turn the discussion over to Dr. Anna Orlova, who is really going to talk about the technologies and the approaches that will help us get to clinical harmonization. Go ahead, Anna.
Thank you, Deb, very much. Let me show you the slide, which I believe everybody is very familiar with nowadays. Every doctor, every patient today can share different types of data using health information technology. We're sharing images, we're sharing lab results and lab orders, we're sharing medication prescriptions, we're sharing content directives, we're sharing genomic data, we're sharing research data. Today, according to the Health IT dashboard at the Office of National Coordinator, 96% of U.S. hospitals adopted certified electronic health record by 2015. Over 54% of U.S. physicians adopted various kinds of electronic health record, according to the data of 2015. Over 75% of U.S. physicians adopted those certified electronic health record by various specialties. I think we all know today that computers are everywhere. They are at the bedside, they are in the physician offices, they are in the corridors of the hospitals, they are in the waiting rooms where we're waiting for the doctor to be seen. They're in our pockets because right now we're also carrying the mobile data with us. In fact, we successfully achieved what would be called interoperability. We're working right now on interoperability, which means that the healthcare systems or physician offices have to exchange data with each other in a trusted way. And how we're doing there, supporting this interoperability, we're doing fine. There are a lot of interoperability platform pilot projects that are available today to exchange data, and it looks like the health information technology, electronic health record, ancillary systems such as laboratory information management systems and pharmacy information management system, public health information management systems, and research-related systems are everywhere. And I believe everything would be absolutely great until we begin hearing from physicians of their frustration and the lack of usability of technology that we put in place. According to the research conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in 2015, clinically relevant information is not available at the task at hand. Our medical record has inadequate documentation, inaccurate information, and information is irretrievable. All this contribute to suboptimal and unsafe patient care. It is probably surprising in this presentation to talk about standards when in fact the country adopted so much technology to date. What technology did we adopt? Does this technology actually support standards or does it need standards? According to the NIST usability study that I mentioned, the answer to address challenges with EHR adoptions is, by the way, standards. So in 2015, we begin again talking about standards. What standards we are actually talking about, if we need them? Are those standards ready for implementation? Do they support user needs? What user needs do they support? Are they still emerging research and development projects? And do we actually have standards that we need? In the past 3 years, Office of National Coordinator have been publishing the Interoperability Standards Advisory that you see here on the slide, which lists different types of standards that should be used in interoperability projects. But how they should be used? Who tested them? In AHIMA, we've been commenting on ONC interoperability frameworks, interoperability measurement approach, on the Interoperability Standards Advisory, calling first of all for the need to define what do we mean by interoperability. 1 month ago, I was at the ONC meeting, which called Technical Interoperability. And you've heard today in a depth presentation, there are so many other aspects of interoperability which has direct impact on usability that in fact is not covered by technical interoperability per se. Do we have a national definition of interoperability? Do we know what standards do we need to support interoperability? Because it's different standards. It's not just individual standards we can publish in the catalogs, but we have to show the vendors that these standards must work together to support user needs. How are we capturing user needs right now? I don't think we do. The use case or business case approach that we've been using in 2005, 2009 under the American Health Informatics community was no longer continued, and we were focusing more on transaction-based use cases, send, receive, technical use cases, rather than give me the right information at the right time for the right patient. Interoperability standards are different types of standards. They require harmonization of individual standards to work together to support user needs. Did we test interoperability standards? We do have IHE Connectathon testing, which is a successful event that shows that standards actually can work. But do we know if those standards have been adopted by health IT products? And will these standards work within interoperable health IT products as we expected? IHE is planning to launch so-called projectathons, where we are planning to test standards-based IT products, but this is just a vision. What is the approach to adopt standards-based IT products? How are we doing it right now in terms of evaluating the way they support user needs? It looks like we have a long way to go. And I would like to call the attention of this audience to actually the AHIMA definition of interoperability, which we adopted from the HL7 2007 definition of interoperability, which means the ability to capture, manage, communicate, and exchange data accurately, effectively, securely, and consistently with different information technology systems, software applications, and networks in various settings, and exchange data such that clinical and operational purpose and meaning of the data are preserved and unaltered. Unfortunately, today, in our ONC interoperability framework, the definition from IEEE, which is International Committee of Electrotechnical Engineers, is used again with a focus on technical interoperability, not the other aspects of interoperability. What are those other aspects of interoperability? According to the HL7, it is semantic interoperability, shared content, technical interoperability, shared information infrastructure, and functional interoperability, shared rules. 2 years ago in Europe, a European interoperability framework was adopted across European Union countries, in which they actually followed this HL7 definition of interoperability in their framework right now, focusing on specific standards for technical, semantic, and functional interoperability. And under functional interoperability, they're talking about legal and organizational rules and policies. What are these standards that, in fact, we're talking about that should support interoperability? They are data and information content standards, as well as identifier standards to support semantic interoperability, information exchange, privacy and security, health IT safety standards to support technical interoperability, and functional interoperability, such as functional standards and business standards, which are all important to make sure that we have trusted information. AHIMA is focusing on building semantic interoperability and functional interoperability standards, but not only building and developing them, but making sure that they're adopted in the electronic health record products, as well as these health information exchanges that support information sharing, trusted information sharing between various systems. We're doing this work with ISO Technical Committee 215. ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization, and Technical Committee 215 Health Informatics is right now leading the development of the international interoperability standards called the Reference Standards Portfolio, where semantic, technical, and functional interoperability standards would be shown to work together. And the first standard in this ISO portfolio is clinical imaging, reference standards portfolio for clinical imaging standards. We continue to work with IHE to make sure that technical interoperability addresses the needs to send and receive data in the way that physicians and health information managers and other those who need to know get this information intact and at the right time, the right place. And of course, we continue to work on HL7 standards, which are those individual building blocks that help us, in fact, to support interoperability. We're doing this work at AHIMA with the subject matter experts, HIM professionals, volunteers of the AHIMA Standards Task Force. And I am very honored to give the floor further to Catherine Lusk, who is one of the active participants of AHIMA Task Force, guiding us on the needs of HIM professionals and clinicians to support the information sharing tasks. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Anna. It's my privilege to work with you on the information governance, the standards work group. I've certainly learned a lot, and it's helped me on many levels. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about how that we at Children's Health System of Dallas have taken what we've learned from information governance and the standards work group and used it to harmonize our data across the state of Texas and improve interoperability. So this is a pictorial of Children's Health. We're a large academic medical center that has the honor of serving the children of North Texas. So what is the platform for interoperability? Information governance provides that structure and process for trusted data. Deb talked to you about that. Standards allow organizations to build electronic medical records and health records to capture clinical data in a consistent, trusted manner for internal and external exchange. Anna talked to you about that. And what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit more is trust, and how that trust when information governance and standards provides the foundation for decreasing clerical functions and the administrative rework involved. Clinical care is enhanced with the addition of technology, and the cost of healthcare can be decreased. Clinical mishaps and duplicative tests are also reduced. However, we have to get to the point where we trust one another. How do we get to that trust? Well, we get to that trust by investing in data integrity and building trust. Here at Children's in Dallas, what we did to get to that point was we embarked with AHIMA on an information governance journey, and we used AHIMA to help us understand where we can improve our information governance and how we could leverage what we already knew. We had good, solid information governance. However, we were working in silos, and we wanted to decrease those silos and leverage what each and every one of us knew. So we started that journey about 2 years ago, and right now we've reached a level 5, and we're very proud of this. Now, do we think that we're done? No, we don't think that we're done. Information governance is one of those things that you always need to be thinking about and always need to keep in the back of your mind. But that's how we built trust. And when we were talking about interoperability, and Anna was talking about the standards in place to improve interoperability, we used that trust. We had confidence in our abilities here internally to embark on working with our partners across the state of Texas to improve interoperability. So we worked together to establish the Texas EPIC Interoperability Collaborative, where we're working to improve exchange of information across the state of Texas. We utilize standards, information governance, and collaboration. Each and every one of us trusts one another to do the right thing. But we couldn't have done that had we not known at Children's how we were doing on information governance internally first. We had to believe in ourselves before we could begin embarking on a journey to work with other people. So one of the first things that we did was we realized that interoperability was challenged in the pediatric market because of the lack of naming standards. There's 3 pediatric organizations that are members of the Texas Interoperability Collaborative with EPIC, and we were talking to our adult partners about how pediatric care is often compromised and there's the inability to exchange records electronically because of lack of a national standard. In the adult world, people use the legal name and the name on their driver's license and on the Social Security card, but in the pediatric world, those things don't exist. So we worked on and we presented this position paper that was written by the Children's Hospital Association, by the Health Information Management leaders, on a standard for pediatric naming conventions. And we presented this to all of our partners across Texas, and everyone agreed to adopt these standards. Once again, there was trust and collaboration. And if you can connect patients, then you can exchange information. And I'm going to encourage every one of you to adopt these standards too. So these are the Children's Hospital Association Pediatric Patient Naming Recommendations, and you can see how it looks. Mom's name is Katie Smith, and mom's maiden name is Katie Miller. So baby's name if girl, Smith, girl, Katie. Baby name if boy, Smith, baby, Smith, boy, Katie. And the baby's name if undetermined. Now here is an important aspect. If there are multiple births, people don't think about how many multiple births there are, but I can tell you as an organization that when we started on the Health Information Exchange journey, 3 different organizations that we were working with, not our EMR vendor, but 3 other organizations, overlaid our multiple births and got back to me and said, you have a 22% duplicate rate. To which then I said, well, give me the list of those patients and let me look at them one by one and let's see if there is really a duplicate rate at Children's Health. Well, there was not a duplicate rate. What it was is all 3 of these vendors overlaid these children of multiple birth. And the reason is their system did not have a way to know that this was twin A, B, or C. They were looking at children with a very similar name at the same date of birth and the same address. So they did not have a means to tell that these were multiple birth children. So had I not pushed back on them and told them that no, they couldn't automatically combine them, then there could have been some safety issues there. We caught it in testing. However, that really led me to understand that we needed to adopt a national recommendation for the pediatric population. Another thing that we have done is medication standards. Anna talked about standards. RX norm is produced by the U.S. National Library of Medicine, and it takes multiple vocabularies, first data bank, micromedics, Medispan, and it combines those. It serves as a normalization. So here's what we have done for mapping for our interoperability. We want to make sure that the patient data looks and feels the same across our patients. So inpatient 1 is seen, and they have first data bank, and we ask our partners to map it to RX norm so that each and every one of us, when we communicate via a national standard RX norm. And in the state of Texas, we have an urgent care company that utilizes EPIC. We have PCPs, and we have hospital systems. We're asking each and every one of them, regardless of whether they use First Data Bank, Micromedics, or what they're using, to map to RX norm so that the data looks and feels the same. This will allow us to do medication reconciliation and to allow our providers to feel good about the information that they're getting and to be comfortable that care won't be compromised. So it's trust, information governance, and standards. So in summary, widely adopted standards pave the way for interoperability. Using standards allows you to exchange information and allows vendors to exchange information in a trusted, consistent format. Our vendor partners cannot build a vocabulary that is unique to each and every one of our organizations and stay in business. It's just not conceivable. And we as organizations cannot continue to map based on that, based on different languages at each and every organization. We have to get to a standard so that we can exchange information so that care can really be improved. But if we provide that information to our clinicians electronically in a standard manner that they can believe in, we can decrease the administrative costs associated with data entry and scanning. We can avoid duplicate tests, and we can provide care in a more efficient manner. Information governance assures data integrity, providing a foundation for trust for interoperability. So what I've done today is just kind of go through how that we establish an information governance program here at Children's Health. We believed in our data and we were comfortable with what we were producing, and then how we worked with our partners across the state of Texas to introduce data integrity and standardization so that when we exchange records, it all looks and feels the same and creates a system of trust with our clinical care partners across the state. We hope to leverage this same process across the United States, but we were starting in our great state. I'm going to turn this over to my new friend Neil and let him talk to you even more about harmonizing clinical information.
Thanks, Catherine. This has been a great presentation, obviously, from Deb, Anna, and Catherine. Deb and Anna have provided such an interesting perspective in sort of the deep technical work that they're doing at the AHIMA side. And what Catherine has shown is really a great example of how this is being capitalized on in Texas with the pediatric hospitals. My perspective is going to be a little bit different on this. I represent JFK Health System. It's a mid-sized community health system located in central New Jersey, partway between New York City and Philadelphia. We're in a very competitive marketplace. There's a wide range of EMRs in use among not just our physicians, but our competitors in the region. And we struggle mightily with information governance and data governance within not just our organization, but within our community. And one of the things I find interesting just in the discussion that we've had is I'd love to see what I think is a perceived gap between some of the exciting work happening at the AHIMA end and perhaps finding a way to bridge that more in partnership with organizations like HIMSS and others. AHIMA's adoption model is certainly intriguing, and I'll confess I wasn't really fully aware of it until I had the honor of being asked to join this group. I am familiar with many other adoption models. Those of you who are in the EMR space now are familiar with the MRAM or the analytics adoption model, the continuity of care maturity model. There are a number of models that are out there, and obviously as IT professionals, we have to figure out how we can leverage these models effectively to bring the desired benefits to our organization. And that, I think, is a big challenge because depending on the size and scope of the organization, how do you justify the resources necessary to really adopt some of these models? Catherine, in her last slide, talked about the benefits of the potential and reduction in duplicate testing or administrative efficiencies. And I think we all intuitively believe in those, but I don't know that we've seen hard data proving that. And that is a struggle, at least from my perspective, as I try to justify resources to pursue some of this stuff. So I'm going to go through very quickly in the interest of time because I know we want to try to get some questions, and certainly I can't give deeper and more elegant and eloquent content than my colleagues have. But just from the CIO perspective, the history of this is a challenge that's 30-plus years in the making. We started really focusing on departmental systems and tying them together with these interfaces with loose standards. Originally our focus was really departmental versus enterprise. JFK, we just informally measure some 75 interfaces connecting 35 of our major systems out of really somewhere around 300 systems that we support here at the health system. And so if you really look at the need for exchanging information between these systems, it's a major resource consumer for us. We struggle a lot with how we can reconcile data between our various siloed systems and the multiple standards that exist kind of both from the technical side and then from the content side. Yeah, somewhere in the mid-2000s, this whole concept of big data began to surface, or the phrase big data began to get a lot of traction in healthcare. Obviously, other industries had been leveraging their data effectively for several years. I think retail and banking are two great examples of that. Here, as the meaningful use initiatives began to drive that widespread adoption of EMRs that Anna was talking about, it really began to waken our clinical colleagues as to the fact that there's a lot of data available to them, and the struggle was how to get that into meaningful information. And that struggle of trying to extract data and provide information really began to highlight some of our challenges and began to shine a spotlight on the lack of standards and the concern about interoperability and governance overall from a data-specific perspective. So the challenges, and I think others have expressed these in far more detail and again far more eloquently, but from my perspective, the lack of strong interoperability standards, it's made integration very resource intensive and a challenge for us. The basic idea of data field definitions have been a challenge because these siloed systems that have emerged over time can often have subtly different definitions on simple things like admission date. And then that basic variance can make the data, the information you generate from your data, not consistent, and often it can cause problems in terms of that trust that Catherine was talking about. And then obviously one of the bigger challenges we're seeing in the IT front now is that just this growth in the data itself. It's growing exponentially, and we've got to figure out how to manage this data in some kind of structured way over time. And increasingly we're finding that the data itself is not what was traditionally data that was still ultimately in our control, even if it was from a whole host of disparate systems or siloed systems. They were systems that we generally owned and controlled. Now we're seeing an increase of consumer and patient provided data or patient owned data, and that's going to provide a whole new layer of challenge for us. So, at JFK we decided that we did have an IT governance committee that met and oversaw the traditional things that IT governance does manage and oversee, but we recognized that these data challenges were becoming quite significant. We struggled, though, to get the right level of resource committed to them, and frankly, it was a major system implementation that got us the sort of, cover necessary to fund a real meaningful data governance infrastructure. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to kind of skip through this. Some of the things we did do quickly were establish this data governance committee. We've been focusing on creating and maintaining enterprise data dictionaries, trying to make sure that we minimize the number of standards we're focusing on, and look at how we're aggregating the data overall from a repository standpoint, and trying to remain focused on some of the emerging standards like FHIR to see if there are ways for us to get better at exchanging and leveraging data from across multiple systems. Some of the lessons that we learned along the way, IT governance and information governance are really two distinctly different things, and you need to maintain a focus on both. There's a lot of unglamorous work involved in information governance, and a lot of it is getting down and cataloging, defining, mapping your data across the systems. Defining that data has really been a challenge for us, surprisingly difficult challenge. And then having those enterprise change controls as we manage our environment across these multiple systems to ensure that those data governance models are kept current. And a few other things, just the single source of truth concept, it's an ideal, but it's not always practical. And some of this great work that's going on in the academic arena and some of the work that organizations like AHIMA are doing, which is really very eye-opening to me, it's got to be translatable to the operational arena, and I'd love to hear more over time on how we can really adopt some of this great work. And then the last thing is, you've got to really take this in bites. Information governance is a massive kind of process to assess and get your arms around, and if you think you're going to do it all at one shot, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So with that, I rushed through it. I know there's only a few minutes left, but I'll hand it back to Fred, and hopefully any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Deborah, Anna, Catherine, and Neil for this excellent presentation. We'll now hear some insights from Ed O'Brien of Dimensional Insight, who's going to talk a little bit more on this topic, and they're kindly sponsoring this webinar. So Ed, take it away.
Great, thanks, Fred. And it was our pleasure to sponsor today's webinar, Information Governance Becoming a More and More Important Topic, both inside the healthcare industry and outside of it. Obviously, we're focused on healthcare today. Dimensional Insight has a business intelligence software product called the Diver Solution or Diver Platform. It's an enterprise-wide business intelligence solution from ETL to pushing out to end users. We include governance, collaboration, and rules engine functionality in the software. It's won multiple awards, including a number of best-in-class awards over the past few years. Deborah had mentioned the governance principles, the AHIMA information governance principles. These are a listing of the principles, and I thought it'd be interesting to, considering the context of the conversation, take a look at the Diver Platform's functionality in terms of those principles. The availability of the data, pushing something out to users in a way that's easy for them to get to, easy for them to understand and ask questions on, to be able to get to lower levels of detail, security withstanding, of course. The ability of Diver to be able to allow users to do answer a lot of their own questions and slice and dice the data in an intuitive interface sets us apart. The users also have the ability to have visibility and transparency, which are the two other principles, into what the data shows and what the data means. What's the definition, the business logics, any reference materials that might be available. So at any point in time, a user can click on a measure and actually understand exactly what it is that it's showing them. Deborah had also mentioned that there's a need for data dictionaries and glossaries, inventories of measures. This would be one way to represent those, where users can come in, see a listing of all the measures, and actually start asking questions on the measures and getting to information about the metadata itself. The collaboration functionality also comes in so that users in different business groups can ask questions about and collaborate on the measures, so that there's some integrity to the measures, there's accountability, there's transparency. Also retains history of the measure over time, so that when there's staff turnover, you don't lose access to any of this data or those principles. And for an accountability perspective, once you're in the dashboard, being able to ask questions about the numbers that are there, setting up performance improvement plans, and actually holding people accountable for performance improvement is another one of the principles. Our rules engine in the middle there takes the plans and specifications that are products of the governance process, applies it to the raw data sets, and pushes out ways for users to get at the data either through dashboards or applications. So again, it was our pleasure to sponsor this seminar. We think it's an important topic. And back to you, Fred.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ed. We are running a bit over, so sadly we won't have any time for questions and answers today. For all you who are listening in, appreciate that. All attendees will be receiving a follow-up email by the end of the week with a link to access of the recording and slides from today's webinar. With that, we'll send you back to the rest of your day. And I thank everyone for attending this webinar on this important topic, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.